You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So, Glenn, I want to talk about the Hunter Biden conviction and its implications for this whole narrative that Donald Trump is being unfairly prosecuted. And because this battle is largely being fought in the media, I thought it would be important to arm our viewers with some information to push back on this persistent claim that Donald Trump is the victim of some weaponized government. So, Glenn, can you speak on how this conviction of Hunter Biden has all but destroyed the GOP's narrative here?
Yeah, these are some really important talking points and arguments that I think we should all take advantage of, because what happened with Hunter Biden's conviction, in essence, puts a nail in the coffin of Donald Trump's absurd claim that he's being politically persecuted. And it also destroys, yammering Jim Jordan's claim that the Department of Justice is being weaponized against Republicans. And here's why I say the Hunter Biden conviction is so important as a talking point. So we now see how the two parties, the Republican Party and the Democrats, how they view the rule of law. How does Joe Biden view the rule of law? Well, here are some important data points. One, when Joe Biden came into office, he had every right, indeed the expectation is, that he would ask for the resignation of all U.S. attorneys, including the one in Delaware, because that's what presidents do. They appoint U.S. attorneys of their choosing, people that share their vision, their goals, the priorities of the criminal justice system that the president has, that the president ran on and got elected on. But you know what Joe Biden did, and this still is kind of astonishing to me. He left in place the Delaware U.S. Attorney, David Weiss, who was a Republican and a Republican appointee, appointed by who? Donald Trump. Why? Because David Weiss was in the process of investigating Hunter Biden, President Biden's son. And President Biden said, I don't want to be perceived as interfering in a criminal investigation into my son, so I will leave that Trump-appointed U.S. attorney in place. And what happened? That Trump-appointed U.S. attorney indicted, took to trial, prosecuted, and ultimately won a conviction of President Biden's only living son. What did President Biden say? I will accept the verdict, the jury's verdict. I will not interfere in the case in any way, and I will not even pardon my son. That is somebody, you want to take the measure of a man when you talk about somebody's parental instincts, maybe colliding with your presidential instincts, what's good for your family versus what's good for the country. He chose to support his son, showed him love and support throughout, but he chose the rule of law. He chose what was good for the country, and it may end up with his only living son being imprisoned, even though he has the power to put a stop to that. That tells you everything you need to know about the measure of the man, Joe Biden. As compared to Donald Trump, what did Donald Trump do when he was prosecuted for his crimes? He attacked the witnesses and the jurors and the judges and the prosecutors and their family members, and he had his flunkies and lackeys and lapdogs, particularly in Congress, do the same. What does that show you? They don't respect the rule of law. More than that, Brian, look at who is being prosecuted right now. A Democrat, Hunter Biden, who is the son of a president who is a Democrat. Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat, is being prosecuted federally by the Department of Justice in New Jersey as we speak. A congressman who is a Democrat, Henry Cuellar, out in Texas, was just indicted for political corruption. By whom? The Department of Justice. And yet yammering Jim Jordan says the Department of Justice is being weaponized against Republicans. Well, boy, they're doing a lousy job of weaponizing against Republicans because they're prosecuting these Democrats. And Brian, you don't hear a single outcry that these prosecutions of Democrats are witch hunts. You don't hear anybody, not Republicans, not Democrats, trying to undermine the rule of law or the criminal justice system when Democrats are prosecuted for their crimes. But boy, they do nothing but try to crap all over the rule of law and the institutions of government when it's their orange deity Donald Trump being prosecuted. Brian, I've always said it's not us and them in America. It's just us, right? Different kinds of us, different flavors, different persuasions, people with different priorities and ideologies and political affiliations, but it's still just us. And I think it's incumbent upon us not to call folks names like maggots, but to try to talk across the great divide. And these talking points are so powerful. No, you can't reach everybody, but you know what? If we're all us, there are some us that can be reached, maybe in ones and twos and sixes. So I think we have to use these important talking points to try to persuade people that we can and should continue to try to talk across the divide. Because at the end of the day, I think all of us kind of want the same things for ourselves and our kids and our families. And so I think this gives us some valuable tools to try to use to talk across that divide.
That was perfectly put. On a similar point, there was a contempt resolution that was handed down by Republicans, of whom their leader, one of their chairmen is Jim Jordan, for defying a congressional subpoena. All the while, Jim Jordan himself is over 700 days delinquent on his own congressional subpoena. And yet these people had the audacity, these Republicans in Congress had the audacity to hand down this contempt resolution against Merrick Garland for ignoring a congressional subpoena. And this was because he didn't give an audio transcript of President Biden's deposition with Special Counsel Robert Hur, even though there was a written transcript of that exact deposition. But it seems like any excuse would be a valid enough excuse for Republicans to try to push forward this contempt resolution. So given the fact that, Republicans led by Jim Jordan, who himself is delinquent on a subpoena, are handing down contempt resolutions for someone else defying a congressional subpoena, is the irony not lost based on this?
In a very real sense, Brian, we have a criminal running a congressional committee. Jim Jordan committed the crime of contempt of Congress, the exact same crime Steve Bannon committed and was convicted of and is heading to prison for. Peter Navarro committed that identical crime. He's serving a prison term. Jim Jordan committed the identical crime, and he has never been held to account. And now he's running a congressional committee. The prisoner is basically in charge of the prison, or the criminal is in charge of the congressional committee. And that is a special kind of obscenity in our system of government right now. I can only hope at some point the Department of Justice will apply the rule of law against the members of Congress who committed crimes on and around January 6th, or like Jim Jordan in the aftermath of January 6th by criminally defying a congressional subpoena. And let's face it, the members of Congress, current and former, who asked for pardons, that is an admission of guilt. That's virtually a confession that they knew they committed crimes on and around January 6th, and they wanted to get away with those crimes, and they needed a presidential pardon to escape accountability. How about we actually use the rule of law on those folks and hold them accountable for their crimes?
That leads to my next question, which is exactly that point. Do you think that the fact that the Department of Justice hasn't sought to hold the Jim Jordans of the world accountable, even though he has committed blatant crimes for which Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro and plenty of people before them have all gone to prison, do you think the fact that they have refused to basically enforce the law with regard to those people, the Jim Jordans of the world, is that giving him, is that emboldening him to continue not only not shying away from this talking point, but barrel forward with contempt resolutions against the very person who would be in charge of the DOJ?
Oh, sure. If you want more criminal conduct, then decline to prosecute crimes.
It's kind of amazing that the one person who's in charge, this is Merrick Garland. He is the person in charge of the Department of Justice who has refused to bring forward any type of enforcement action against Jim Jordan, and that has so emboldened Jim Jordan to the point where Jim Jordan himself then helped perpetuate this process where Merrick Garland would be held in contempt. If that is not, if that's not like him taking you by the shoulders and shaking you and letting you know that if you do not hold these people accountable, then look at the extent to which they'll be emboldened.
Yeah, Brian, declining to prosecute the Jim Jordans and the others, particularly the ones who asked for pardons, and I always go back to that because I never did start a criminal investigation with a confession. Usually I started by being told a crime had been committed. Now we need to investigate, including in the grand jury, to figure out who committed it
these
and
guys
whether
already
we have
gave the
enough
game
evidence
away.
to charge them. They gave us the confession. That usually doesn't come until after somebody is indicted,
Right.
arrested, Mirandized, interrogated, and they confess. We've got the confession. But you know what? Declining to prosecute crime begets more crime. Just imagine if the Department of Justice announced, we will no longer prosecute bank robberies. Do you think you'd see an explosion in bank robberies?
Yeah.
Well, they have all but announced they will not prosecute members of Congress for democracy-busting crimes they committed on and around January 6th. So buckle up and expect more democracy-busting crimes by Jim Jordan's and those of his ilk.
Yeah, and hopefully, again, this is the wake-up call for these extrajudicious people in the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland included, who are so worried about the optics of politicization. All the while, what that's doing is giving the Republicans an open runway to just completely abuse the system. And they're starting with you. They're starting with these contempt resolutions against you. So, I mean, this is just, it's making a mockery of the whole system. And, you know, I would love to point 100% of the blame at Republicans. But again, to the point that we were just discussing, if you refuse to hold these people accountable, there is no incentive for them to actually follow the law. So hopefully this, again, serves as some small kick in the ass to the folks in charge, at the DOJ, Merrick Garland included, to move forward with these prosecutions against people who deserve it, so that we don't see these mockeries made of the justice system on a daily basis. With that said, we will continue to follow along with all of this stuff, especially as it relates to Jim Jordan and any other action that he might try to take. So if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.